Hello everyone, and as you can see by the ridiculous health pool, we are taking a look at the 4.0 Darkness Assassin. That's right, we spent double XP, the 2 weeks of double XP, still got an XP booster. You can see how long it took me to level him to 65. Not very long, really. You just go through the story, get to chapter 4, and you're just level 65. By default, double XP is finished, of course, but we've got Drodar up there. What's this all about then? What is the assassin tank all about? Despite having a massive HP pool. We've already done the other two. Shadow, we did the other two, the DPS specs, but we were a big dick assassin now. We have a big dick. And we're gonna tank and poke our big dick into things with Maul. That's basically what you do with the Darkness Assassin. You're a tank. What does it say? Does it give you, can we get the description without resetting it? Ah, there we can. There we go. In darkness there is protection. A darkness assassin acts in defense of their allies, using the dark side of the force to ward off attacks and launch powerful channels of force lightning while standing their ground against even the most formidable enemies. There you go. There's a little description of the darkness assassin. So as it says here, we are a tank, and we are a light armor tank. So of course we are going to use the force techniques. One of our main things is, of course, our dark ward surrounds you in a dark ward. 15 charges. That increases our shield chance by 15% for 20 seconds. Every time we successfully shield an attack, dark ward loses a charge. Now at level 64, we do get the shield chance gets increased by an additional 3%, so we get 18% shield chance from this, okay? And we get a 20% chance when we're attacked while Dark Ward is active that it can refund us a charge of Dark Ward. So we can get one of those 15 charges refunded to us. There it is, that's what it looks like. Pretty cool, actually. I think it's cooler than the Shadow one with the rocks all around them. Got a little dark ward. You can see your shield chance jumps up to 45%. Show you it with it off. It's 27. Jumps up to 45 whenever we put it up. So you can see it is useful. It does feed into our other ability, which is Dark Bulwark. Consuming a charge of dark wards increases shield absorption by 1%. So whenever we consume a charge of a dark ward, we will get Dark Bulwark, okay, which will increase our absorption rating. If you don't know the relationship between shield and absorb, wrong panel. There we go. Shield is our chance to chance that incoming energy or kinetic damage will be reduced by our shield. That's the chance for it to be reduced, and that's the amount it's going to be reduced by. Okay. Percentage of damage prevented when attack is absorbed by your shield. So these have they do relate directly to each other. In this spec, we are going to lean heavily on absorb for this, for stat wise, but we'll cover gearing later on. We've got our Dark Bulwark, of course, which is very, very nice. We've got our Wither, very nice ability. Causes 8 targets to wither under the weight of the force, deals some nice damage, slows their movement speed while targets by 30% for 10 seconds, and weakens the target for 45 seconds. Weakened targets do 5% less melee and range damage. It doesn't break CC, or at least it shouldn't. Apparently it's bugged right now and it does break CC. But there's BioWare for you, of course. That is BioWare. So yeah, we've got our Shock as well. It's one of the only specs that actually uses Shock. Shock does 25% more damage as well, and it costs 15% less force. What it can do is... No, that's nothing there. And it also procs to become an automatic critical hit. Where is it? Well, Dark Charge. Damage dealt by Thrash, Maul, Lacerate is a 30% chance to finish the cooldown on Shock and make your next Shock an automatic critical hit. Energized Shock, consume a charge of Recklessness, deal an additional 50% critical damage. So if you're struggling for threat or you're struggling for damage, it's quite nice. Recklessness, of course, gives us 60% crit chance. Crit is not important here as a tank, okay? Don't go stacking crit. we don't really care about crit. Our force regen rate gets increased as well. We get our armor rating increased. We're still the lowest armor in the game though. Lightning reflexes increases our melee range defense by 4%, while Dark Charge is active. Dark Charge you're going to be in all the time in this one. We successfully shield, parry, or deflect an attack. We recover 2% of our total force, okay? Also, the damage dealt by our next discharge is up 75%, okay? It cannot occur more than once a second and doesn't stack, which is a shame. It's a shame. If it stacked, it would be amazing, okay? Okay, so lightning reflexes actually gets 8% force in this one. So we shield a parry, reflect attack. The active cooldown of Force Shroud is reduced. So Force Shroud is our main oh shit button. See here, it protects us from force and tech attacks, 200% for 5 seconds. Very, very nice. Good for mitigating against spike damage, particularly fights like Sword Squadron we get as well. Got our force pull, which is very, very nice. Pull the force in, pull the target in using the force, pull the target in using the force. Generates a very high amount of threat. Okay, this generates a lot of threat. The other thing, our discharge acts as an AoE in this one. So when we're in Dark Charge, strikes up to 8 enemies. It deals high amount of threat. Okay, and puts discharge on cooldown. Of course, discharge changes depending on which spec we're in. This one is an AoE. It also reduces their target's accuracy as well. I can't find that. Shield absorption. Increase your stealth detection level by 2%. Shield absorption by 4%. You activate Overcharge Saber. Dark Charge is active. Damage reduction is increased by another 25%. So your Overcharge Saber is a nice defensive cooldown. It does provide you with healing whenever you do melee attacks. So it is a very good defensive cooldown. I'm trying to find the thing that tells you where discharge. Anyway, we'll get there. We've got our Depredating Volts, which replaces our Force Lightning. I can't find these things now. It does lower the target's accuracy. Just can't find the tooltip for it. Where is the tooltip? Discharge effect. Nope, can't find it. Must be on the Dark Charge tooltip, I'm pretty sure. For this, because it does lower their accuracy. Strikes up to 8 nearby enemies. Who cares? It does lower accuracy, I'm pretty sure. I read that somewhere, but I can't remember where. Shock and Wither, grant harness, darkness, force lightning, increases damage reduction, dark protection, selects the force. Oh yeah, you've got your dark protection, I forgot about that. So your shock and wither grant you harness darkness, which makes your next force lightning or depredating volts used uninterruptible and immune to pushback. Okay, and each stack increases the damage dealt by our next force lightning or depredating volts. We'll just replace that with depredating volts because after level 60, is it 60? 58, we're going to be using depredating volts anyway. Depredating volts, very, very useful, can be used on the move, don't forget that as well. So it increases that by 25%, stacks up to 3 times. At 3 stacks, each tick of force lightning or depredating volts grants dark protection, which increases damage reduction by 1%, and it stacks up to 4 times and lasts for 12 seconds. Very, very important that we get our depredating volts out while it's under the stacks of Harness Darkness. Okay, we're going to build a lot of stacks. It's a lot of stack management, this spec. Really, what you're basically going to do is build up stacks of Harness Darkness and get your depredating volts out, is the basic rotation guide, while keeping up your Dark Ward. We generally want to keep that up now, but we'll cover that later on. Let's take a look at the utilities, which kind of suck for the assassin. Really, they do suck, really. Avoidance is pretty nice. I tend to take this. We just use the cooldown of Jolt by 2 seconds, Unbreakable Will by 30 seconds, and Force Speed by 5 seconds. Okay, Force Speed is probably the most useful of these things. Jolt is useful for interrupting, and Unbreakable Will is your stun breaker. Lambast is nice if we're doing cleaving, then, you know, increase the damage dealt by Lacerate by 25%. Okay, there it is there. There it is. While Dark Charge is at, Discharge causes the targets to be unsteady for 45 seconds. Unsteady targets have their melee and ranged accuracy reduced by 5%, and Lacerate will deal 15% more damage to unsteady targets. So if we're, say we're off tanking Titan 6, so that means we're doing the ads, really, we can gather up the ads, do 25% more damage, and we get the 15% more damage if we use our Discharge. And Discharge we will be using with our AoE. So the faster we kill the ads, faster we get back to the boss, and we pull the ads under the boss and we can just AoE and cleave. So quite nice for cleave this spec. Lambast if we're doing things like that. Insulation, again, if our guarded targets are going to take damage, then maybe. Okay, it doesn't increase our armor rating. That is while the other two charges are active. The targets we guard, when they take damage, increase their damage reduction by 1%. So it can be useful if people are going to take damage, if the target that you're guarding is going to take damage generally. So it's okay. It's okay if you have keep guard on the target, of course. We're going to put guard generally on the DPS. We don't really put it on the healers. Generally, it's a threat thing. Guard, unless the DPS is taking constant damage. Fights like the Revanite Commanders, where your DPS are going to take a bit of damage, because they are going to get threat. It is quite nice, okay, whenever they take damage to, you know, get 3% damage reductions, okay, you know. Oppressing Force lowers the cooldown of Electrocute. Again, if we need to stun things and keep things in place, it can be useful. Whirlwind effects to targets. Two additional standard targets are weak enemies. If we're doing sort of CC, if we're doing a little bit of CC, then it can be useful to use Whirlwind. Problem is, it just has too long an activation time, really, to be useful. Shapeless Spirit, if we're getting stunned, then yeah, we're going to take that. 30% less damage while stunned. Unless we are getting stunned, it's useless though. We've got Overload, binding its targets, not really. Thrash, Voltic Slash, Lacerate, or just the movement speed of targets they damage. You can make an argument for that, maybe. You know, you can make a little bit of an argument if you're AoEing and you hit the target and it doesn't quite, you don't quite generate enough threat on the target, then maybe, but nah, not really. Obfuscation, increase their movement speed while stealth and effective stealth level by 5. You just pick this by default, really. There's not a lot of choice here. Really, I take Avoidance, you know, Insulation if you need it, Shapeless Spirit if you need it. Other than that, Lambast, we might as well have it. If we're going to be cleaving, if we're doing flashpoints so that we're going to be cleaving anyway, and we're going to be doing a lot of ads anyway, so these kinds of things are useful. Masterful, the only real one to take, Disjunction. Okay, increase the duration of Force Shroud by 2 seconds and Force Speed by ½ second. Useful for getting out of things. You know, Force Shroud and Force Speed. Force Shroud is, again, gives us the damage reduction. You know, it gives a 100% chance to resist force and tech attacks. But, you know, 200% chance, should we say. So we're not going to take any damage for that. So 2 extra seconds of that can be useful. And Force Speed just gets us out of things quicker. You know, increasing the duration. Gets us to our target, gets us away from the target. One of the advantages of this class, of this tank, of the assassin tank, is that you do have excellent mobility. In terms of tanking, this class is the most mobile of the tanks, definitely. The other one I take is Speed Surge, activating Shock, Ball Lightning, Crushing Darkness, or Demolish. Increases their movement speed by 50% for 9 seconds. It's once every 18 seconds. Useful if you're doing something like, if you're doing Sunder, if you're doing the Cartel Warlords and you're kiting Sunder, you will be kiting Sunder generally. If you're an assassin tank, you generally have them kiting Sunder because of the mobility. Getting a 50% movement speed is pretty nice. There's not a lot else here. We're just the cooldown of Blackout with 15 seconds. Force Cloak. Force Cloak, if we're tanking, if there's 2 people tanking 1 boss and you have to do a tank swap, then it can be useful to use Force Cloak. But if it's for flashpoints, we're never going to be using Force Cloak unless we're trolling, of course. Nerve-wracking, not really. Again, targets controlled by our Spike or Electrocute take 5% more damage from all sources, not really in PvE. The big problem is bosses can't be stunned with Spike or Electrocute, so that is an issue. They're not really useful. They're immersion, again, if we're getting movement impairing effects, force speed grants immersion, removing all movement impairing effects and granting immunity to them for the duration. Again, you can stack it with this, getting an extra half second out of that, and stack it with that as well, reducing the cooldown by 5 seconds. Snap Mind, whenever damage breaks our mind trap prematurely, the target will suffer from sapped mind, reducing damage dealt 25%, 10 seconds. If you're in a crappy pug group that keeps breaking your fucking CC, go for that. That's your crappy pug button. Again, at least you're providing mitigation to them. They're too stupid to do that. Audacity, recklessness, we can argue the benefits of recklessness, getting an extra charge of recklessness, because recklessness does have a use here, okay? Recklessness, while Dark Charge is active, activating recklessness grants 30% shield absorption for 20 seconds. It doesn't really affect the amount of stacks that we have. So we generally use recklessness as a defensive cooldown rather than an offensive one. So having a third stack of it, not really as a tank. I don't really recommend it. In Heroic, Assassin's Shelter generally is the way to go. Mass Mind Control provides Assassin's Shelter, which has been redesigned. No longer works on our Phase Walk now. Remember, it used to give us the Phase Walk, and if a healer stood inside the circle, they would get extra healing done. So it no longer works. The Phase Walk is less useful now. We can actually use it as intended to teleport as well. That's another thing that adds to our mobility. So no Assassin's Shelter. Basically using your AoE taunt, Mass Mind Control, will provide Assassin's Shelter to all allies within range, excluding ourselves. Reduces the damage they take by 5%. Okay, and for the next 6 seconds heals them for a pitiful amount of health over the duration. It's not really the health that you want. It's the damage reduction. Again, fights like, again, we think Titan 6, the final phase. Very useful there. The Annihilation Droid and Eternity Vault. Very, very useful when it's doing its lots of missiles phase. Bear in mind, DPS assassins can do this. There's nothing else here that we really want. If we're getting stunned a lot, we can use Phantom Stride while immobilized. Purges movement impairing effects. If we are getting movement impairing effects, then we can use phasing Phantom. But I just tend to take Dark Stability, because using Deflection gives us immunity to stun, sleep, lift, and incapacitating effects. There's nothing else. You could argue Shroud of Madness. The problem with Cloak is it gets rid of our threat. And, you know, in certain fights it might be useful. The best example of this was the Gree event, when you were doing Xeno Analyst, when you really need to use Force Cloak. So that would have been useful there, but there's very little examples in PvE where we could actually use a Cloak. The problem is, if we're tanking ads, it's going to dump all the threat on our ads, and they're going to go and attack the DPS or healers. You could argue Hand of Darkness, Force Pull immobilizes the target. Again, not really. Magnetism, when the target recovers from being stunned by your spike or electrocute, its movement speed is slowed by 90% for 3 seconds. Not really either. We can't use it on bosses. Whirlwind breaks early, the target is stunned for 2 seconds. In addition, Whirlwind activates instantly. It can be useful if we're using Whirlwind a lot, Haunted Dreams, but generally we're not really. Force Cloak increases our movement speed, and Force Slow reduces the movement speed of the target by an additional 20%. Again, not really. Phasing Phantasm you can use if we're getting stunned to purge movement impairing effects. Bear in mind you can only use Phantom Stride on an enemy. It's not like a Scoundrel where you can use it on an ally as well. So let's get down to gearing. We already covered this a little bit, but shield absorption. One of the biggest changes we should point out to gearing is that we can no longer have shield absorb on the same thing, because shield has switched places with defense. Okay, defense isn't everything. If you look at this crappy 208 piece of gear that we got, you'll see here it's shield defense, and if you take a look at this implant, you'll see it's absorb defense. Okay, everything has defense. Defense is now a secondary stat, and shield and absorb are your tertiary stats. So we can no longer have shield absorb. That's a bit of a bugger for us, because we like a decent amount of absorb. However, we do need the shield. We do need a decent amount of shield chance. You see, we got sitting at 27% by default. Now I have 3 shield things. They're pretty crappy, actually. They're not very good. We've got a 208 enhancement, 208, and a 216 commendation piece of crap on this character. We don't have very good gear on this character at all, so we're only sitting at 27%. We want to be ideally 30, I think it's 30, yeah, 32%, because we want 50% when we hit Dark Ward. So we're about 5% short on shield. What it means is we're going to have to augment these for shields. And I'm not going to augment a 208 implant, a 208 earpiece. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. So we are going to have to augment, probably this implant will be augmented for shield. Absorb, we probably want to be above 50% absorb, generally. So everything else is absorb, 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 absorb. One implant is absorbed. So I've got 3 enhancements currently at shield, and as we gear up, we can change this. And augments, generally we're going to go again for absorb. Generally, we want to get to at least sort of 55% absorb, ideally. That would be the ideal. 55-60% absorb. Defense, we can just ignore. You can see the ridiculous amount of defense we've got. Basically, your choice when you're gearing a tank is defense or endurance. And honestly, a lot of people saying it doesn't make a huge difference whether you go defense, endurance. Some people like the defense, some people like the endurance. It's not huge. It's not going to be a breaking factor, because the difference between Mark II gear, which is the stuff, the kind of stuff that the not unassembled, if you get that. The unassembled stuff is Mark 1 and is the tier set piece with the set bonus, and the Mark II piece is the stuff that drops in ops. So you'll get like you'll see like Defiant, Steadfast package Mark II, and that's your personal loot in story mode ops. So your personal loot is the Mark II stuff. The Mark II stuff tends to have more endurance and less defense. The Mark 1 stuff, which is the tier set stuff, the unassembled stuff, tends to have less endurance, more defense. So gearing via Mark II stuff is viable for all of the tanks. You can gear, obviously the tier PCs have the set bonus in them, so you should definitely be going for the tier PCs as well. Also, the tier PCs go up to item level 224. To consider that as well, whereas the Mark II stuff, the highest item level they go up to is only 220. So eventually we're going to be in 224. The goal is to get full 224, really. I'm not going to get there with this guy, really. But for 220, Mark II, 220 gear is viable. Is perfectly viable. Mark 1, not really, because you lose absorb. And we lose absorb and shield, and we don't want to do that. Really, we don't want to do that with this. So you can take a little bit of endurance. You can go a little bit into endurance. It can actually make you survive certain abilities. Okay, you can see how low our shield is. Right, shield is your lowest stat here. We probably want at least 600 shield. We got 401. So you probably want to get up to about 600. Absorb, we're okay for absorb. Actually, we're actually not too bad for absorb. We can maybe even look at dropping. What I've done here is I kept this 198 thing in because it has an absorb thing. You see here, this is defense only. It's augmented for absorb. Still 186 augment, so we've got 208 in there. So you see we've got only 208 augments, the rest is. And for the hilt, what I did is pick the DPS. Oops. And equip that. I put the DPS hilt in because the only difference is endurance. Who cares? Get us some threat. Really, and we've got a pink lightsaber because you're a man, and real men tank with a pink lightsaber. Okay, that's why. That's why he's a real man, is Drodar. Tanks with a pink lightsaber. The relics, we really need to upgrade these. Okay, and we need to augment this one. I like, reactive warding, and I've gone for shield amplification. Okay, shielding an incoming attack grants us extra absorb. So that's what we want to be doing with our things. When it comes to rotation, okay, rotation wise for the tank, we want to start off in stealth, obviously. Coming out of stealth grants us 4 stacks of dark protection. Okay, damage reduction increase. by 4%, which we get from Harness Darkness, Dark Protection. So we start with 4 stacks of Dark Protection. So we're going to start in Stealth. Make sure you start in Stealth is one of the key things. You see a lot of people running up. I see a lot of Shadow tanks or Assassin tanks running up to targets, not in Stealth. And it annoys me because it's 4% damage reduction you're giving up there. Okay? You're going to work hard to get those stacks back. Those Dark Protection stacks. And you know, it's 4% because you start with 4 stacks automatically. Right there. So start in Stealth. We want to have Dark Ward up, obviously, because their 27% shield chance is garbage. The biggest difference between this and 3.0 is our reliance on Dark Ward now. But used to be what we could do is when Dark Ward fell off, we could leave stacks of Dark Bulwark up. We could just leave them up and take the extra absorb, because we could stack shield and absorb on the same piece of gear. We didn't want to ignore defense completely. We do have 31% defense, which is a ridiculously high amount of defense. So we do have more defense this time. This time, however, we're going to struggle to shield an attack. So it means that Dark Ward we generally want to use a bit more on cooldown. Now our level 64 ability, Dark Bastion, reduces the cooldown of Dark Ward by 15 seconds. So when we spent all our stacks of Dark Ward, generally what we don't want to do is sit there with, even with 30 odd % shield, is still not going to be enough. Really, I'd want at least 50% shield to take advantage. So we are going to gain 8%, up to 8% absorb. But generally, I'd rather dump it for shield, because if we're only sitting at 30% shield, we're not going to be getting the benefit of that absorb. So Dark Ward then becomes more of a priority. So we get our Dark Ward up. When we're pulling a boss, generally go-to is going to be Force Pull. So we're going to Dark Ward up. Get our Dark Ward up. Force Pull. Shadow Stride in there. You can hit your free maul. Our priority is always Discharge, Shock, because we're trying to build stacks of Harness Darkness, and then as filler, we're going to press that, and we want to get this off. And our goal is to get Depredating Volts. And you can see here, generating the stacks of Dark Protection. That is our goal with this spec. Okay, so you're going to use Wither on cooldown. Discharge, if Discharge is the lowest priority, generally. So you're going to, what you can do is pull Phantom Stride, might as well use it. You can use the free maul if you want, but get Wither off first, okay? So into Stealth, Dark Ward. Maximum threat is to use pull. Don't use pull on trash though. Don't open with that on trash. Pull, Shadow Stride in, Wither, get a shock off. Might as well use our maul. Get that off. It's not procking. Get that proc as fast. Oops. Put a discharge there in, and then get your Depredating Volts out, and then get your 4 stacks, and then you can use a discharge to lower the target's accuracy. There is its unsteady accuracy reduced. Okay. Discharge tends to be quite low on a single target priority. If it procs, then you know you can use it, but don't use it ahead of shock. Okay, your priority is always shock and wither. Okay, when you don't have 3 stacks. Okay, when you have 3 stacks, Depredating Volts becomes our priority. Depredating Volts you can use while moving as well, so it gives you a ton of mobility. It's got a 10 meter range. See here, 10, 10. You know, you get a 9.4, 10 meter range. You've got here with Depredating Volts. So you can use it while moving, which gives you nice mobility, a decent amount of mobility. The other thing you can do is pop your Recklessness at the pool as well, and you can get more out of Shock and Depredating Volts if you're struggling for threat. You always want to use it with Shock, Recklessness, because it does do a massive amount of damage. Okay, where is it? Energize, there it is. Okay, it'll do 50% additional critical damage. So when shot, if you get your auto crit shock, you can pop Recklessness, and it'll do massive amounts of threat and damage. Threat is never a huge issue though. For a shadow tank, we do produce a lot of threat. For AoE rotation, it's fairly similar. If there's nothing else to press in our single target, we're going to use Thrash as filler. If Maul procs, use Maul. And then instead of Thrash, Maul can be used from the front. Should point out that Maul can be used from the front. Level 52. Exiting Stealth grants 4 stacks of Dark Protection. So, Conspirators Cloak, Thrash, Lacerate, Assassinate, Phantom Stride, grant Conspirators Cloaks, makes our next maul consume 50% less force and usable while face to face with the target. Also, Phantom Stride grants us that as well. So, Maul is useful in this spec. We could open with Spike, I don't have it keybound if we really want to stun the target, but generally we don't really want to open with a Spike on a target. PvP, you generally open with Spike. I don't even have it keybound here for PvE. I don't do PvP with this character, so why would I? But Force Pull generates a nice amount of threat. Force Pull, Phantom Stride is very, very nice. Used to be Force Pull, Force Speed, and then Run In. But we've got our nice Phantom Stride now, which is very, very useful for gap closing. It's useful for switching targets. We've got Force Speed. We've got Depredating Bolts can be used on the move. We've got Shock to increase our movement speed via utility. So we've got a nice amount of movement. We've also got our Phase Walk if you need to hide from something, which is very, very nice. So this spec has a ton of mobility. Okay, when we're AoEing, generally what we're going to do, you've also got your Taunt, okay, Mind Control, Mass Mind Control as well, and you've got, for defensive abilities, we've got Recklessness, again, increases our shield chance, shield absorb chance. You want to use Recklessness with Dark Ward up. Make sure if you get, what does it, is it shield or shield chance? Recklessness. Shield absorption, so we want to make sure Dark Ward is up, okay, when Recklessness is popped, just so we can take advantage of the extra shield chance to get the extra absorbs, which is very, very nice for us. There's no point in having Dark Bulwark up when you can get the extra one from Recklessness. Overcharged Saber is quite nice. It restores 15% of our maximum health, increases the damage of our charges by 50%, which is quite nice. And also, when our charges trigger, they heal us for a small amount. So you'll see here we overcharge Saber, and it is only, you'll see our melee attacks, and whenever our Dark Charge pops, healing us, which is quite nice. You see it doesn't work on force attacks. Now again, it heals us there while it's active, which is quite nice actually. It's a small little heal that you get with your Dark Charge. When your Dark Charge is active. No, in fact, it's when any charge is active, should we say. When it triggers your Dark Charge, should I say. Very, very useful as well. What else we got? We'll talk about AoE. AoE, we'll get there eventually. AoE rotation is kind of similar to your single target rotation, except Discharge plays a much bigger role. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to forgo Force Pull because we're not pulling a boss. What we're going to do is Wither. We can Shadow Strike, we can Phantom Stride in if we want. Wither, Discharge, Lacerate. We can replace our, basically we just replace Thrash with Lacerate. Then we want to get shocks off. Lacerate, you can use your Maul if you want, proc that shock off, get this off as well. You can also use your AoE taunt if you're struggling for threat as well to get threat, and then it's just basically Wither, Discharge on cooldown, keep the target unsteady, keep hitting your Lacerate, fire off your shock. Don't forget to use your shock and your Maul there. Maul don't really need to use, but don't forget to use your shock on cooldown and get your Depredating Bolts out as well on the target. So that's quite a simple AoE rotation. Don't forget the Overload. Now Overload, the worst way to do AoE is to run up to the target out of stealth and go Overload and push everything away. That's not to say that Overload is useless for AoEing. Overload is very, very useful. Say we have a target here that's ranged, and we have a target here, or say we have two targets here and one target here, or two targets here and two targets here. Because what we could do if we have, we're going to go up, pull those targets, select that target, and then force pull it towards those targets. Generally is the way to go. But say you have two targets here and you have two targets over there. What you can do is run up in stealth at an angle and push target A, two targets here, towards each other. Say they're both ranged. You can push them towards each other, and so it can be very, very useful. Or what you can do is push all the targets into a corner, and it makes it easier for your DPS to AoE. It also makes it easier for yourself to get AoE threat because you can use your Wither and your Discharge your Wither and Discharge and your Mass Mind Control are guaranteed to hit all enemies, and of course your Lacerate as well. So Overload, while abused, is not useless. Okay, if you use it correctly, it's very, very useful, because what we always see is people just running up like this. Oh, derp, 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 derp. Oh, AoE! That's my AoE, forgetting that Wither and Discharge are a hell of a lot better to use. You know, again, Wither is going to debuff the enemies, put the debuff on them. Wither puts the debuff called. There it is. Wither puts Weakened, which reduces their damage. Discharge then reduces their accuracy, their melee and ranged accuracy. And then you've got the unsteady target there. Trauma, which reduces their healing as well. And it also does extra damage while the target is under the influence of unsteady. So you want to keep these two debuffs on the target, of course, while they're up. In terms of usage of this, it can be quite difficult compared to the other two tanks, but it's all about stack management. Just manage your stacks of Harness Darkness, manage your stacks of Dark Ward, and you always want to be working towards the Depredating Bolts. Okay, if it's going to generate a stack of Harness Darkness, it's your priority. Okay, that's the way to think of it when you're doing this. Wither or Shock. Use Shock when it's not procced as well. Whenever it comes off cooldown, use it. Okay? Shock on cooldown, Wither on cooldown, Discharge generally if there's nothing else really available, then Thrash, and then get your Shock proccing, Maul if it's procced over Thrash, then get your Depredating Volts off as well. Don't forget to try and keep your Dark Ward up as well, keep your shield rating up, and again you've got your other defensive abilities like Overcharge, Shroud if it all goes tits up, you can use your Shroud. You've got your Deflection, which is alright. Melee and range defense increased by 50% for 12 seconds. Bear in mind, if you take the utility, it'll make you immune to stuns. So if you are getting stunned, then it can be useful there. Recklessness as well is a useful defensive cooldown. Crushing Darkness tends to be a bit useless now. What we used to do is when this was a 30-meter range, we could open with Crushing Darkness, but because it's a 10-meter range and it has a cast time, not really. The big problem is while we're in here and we're in melee range, 2 seconds of doing nothing. 2 seconds where we're not generating Harness Darkness stacks. You know, we're not hitting the enemy with Thrash, we're not getting the chance to proc or Shock. It's just kind of useless. It was useful when it was a 30-meter range, but now that it's got a 10-meter range, bit useless really. There, you could argue you could use that. I prefer Pull. It's going to generate more threat on a boss. You can use that or Pull, but Pull again has a 30-meter range, so we can pull, and of course our Shadow Phantom Stride has a 30-meter range as well, so we can pull Phantom Stride right in there. There's no real reason to use Crushing Darkness anymore. If it was instant cast, we'd use it. But if it's that, it's not. So, kind of useless, really. So anyway, that is all for this video. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again soon, and goodbye.